Just after midnight, the clock kept moving, but inside the Philippine sports arena, time seemed to stand still. The venue had transformed from a simple building into a wall of nonstop cheers. More than 8,000 fans had gathered for a free public watch party, all focused on one giant screen. On that screen, Alexandra Eala had just claimed the second set against Jasmine Paolini, 6-4, forcing a deciding set in their Wimbledon round of 16 clash. That is what people now call the Alex Eala effect. It is not defined by rankings or headlines. It is measured by moments like this, a nation with almost no long-standing professional tennis tradition staying awake well past midnight because a 21-year-old from Quezon City was competing nearly 3,000 miles away on the grass courts of London, chasing a place in her first Grand Slam quarterfinal. The final result did not go her way. Eala lost the deciding set and the match. Yet when the last point was played, something remarkable happened. Instead of falling silent, the arena erupted even louder. It was no longer just about winning a tennis match. It was about witnessing history, sharing belief, and celebrating a player who had already changed what millions of Filipinos thought was possible.
To thank everybody who is here.
That is the part of the story you will never find on a draw sheet, and it is the part worth spending the next few minutes exploring. Because to understand why nearly 8,000 Filipinos gathered in an arena in Pasig after midnight, you have to rewind several years to a graduation ceremony on the Spanish island of Majorca. Among the guests presenting certificates that day was one of the biggest names in women's tennis, fresh off another Grand Slam triumph. Walking across the stage to receive her academy diploma was a young Alex Eala, another promising student dreaming of one day competing on the sport's biggest stages. Years later, student and mentor would meet across the net at Wimbledon. The roles had changed. Eala was no longer there to learn, she was there to prove she belonged. She played fearless tennis, challenged one of the game's established stars, and announced to the world that she was no longer simply a talented prospect. She had become a genuine contender. For Philippine tennis, that moment represented something much larger than a single upset. Before Eala's emergence, Filipino players had rarely broken into the upper levels of the WTA rankings. Today, she has climbed to heights no Filipina has reached before, setting new national milestones and opening doors that once seemed permanently closed. That is not just another step forward. It is an entirely different staircase. Which brings us to the real question this story asks, the question worth answering honestly rather than emotionally. Are we witnessing a Cinderella story? Or are we watching the beginning of a lasting structural change? Those are two very different things, and the distinction matters. Sports history is filled with athletes who burst onto the scene, captured headlines for a few unforgettable weeks, and then quietly disappeared from the spotlight. The Cinderella argument is easy enough to make. Eala is still young. She is continuing to build her resume at the highest level, and professional tennis has a long history of breakthrough seasons that are difficult to repeat. If someone wanted to argue that this is simply one remarkable chapter, there is enough uncertainty in professional sport to support that view. But the stronger argument lies in the evidence accumulated over time. Her rise has not been built on one magical tournament. It has been built through consistent progress, improving rankings, deeper runs at major events, victories over elite opponents, and performances on every surface. Each achievement has added another layer to the foundation instead of standing alone. That is the difference. A Cinderella story usually depends on one extraordinary week. A structural shift is measured by repeated success. Alex Eala has continued to produce those moments against world-class competition. At some point, repeated results stop looking like surprises and start looking like proof. So, let's examine that proof, not to argue a case, but simply to lay out the evidence in the order it happened. Start with what happened back home. When one of Eala's Wimbledon matches was scheduled to begin close to midnight in the Philippines, government agencies and tennis organizations joined forces to open the Phil Sports Arena in Pasig for a free public watch party. Thousands of supporters filled the venue despite the late hour, creating an atmosphere usually reserved for championship boxing matches or major basketball games. That detail matters. Countries do not organize events of that scale simply because an athlete is having one good tournament. They do it because they believe the athlete represents something much bigger. Even more telling, it was not an isolated event. Similar gatherings had already taken place, and many expected more to follow whenever Eala competed on the biggest stages. That is not merely public excitement. It is institutional investment. And institutional investment is one of the clearest signs that something lasting may be taking shape. Now return to Wimbledon. Under the lights on center court, against one of the sport's biggest names, Eala produced the kind of composed performance that elite players respect. She handled pressure, created opportunities, and showed the confidence expected from someone who believes she belongs on the game's biggest stage. The results sent shockwaves through the tournament, but perhaps even more striking was the reaction inside the stadium. The applause was not polite encouragement for an underdog. It was genuine appreciation for a performance that had earned the respect of one of tennis's most knowledgeable crowds. Yet to truly understand the Alex Eala effect, you have to look beyond the court. Wherever she competes now, Filipino supporters arrive in remarkable numbers. Flags appear throughout the stands. Families plan vacations around tournament schedules. Overseas workers, students, professionals, and entire communities organize trips just to watch her play, or sometimes simply to watch her practice. For 1 week at a time, each tournament becomes a gathering place for Filipinos from around the world. That is something rankings cannot measure. Prize money cannot explain it. Statistics cannot capture it. Because what is moving is not only a tennis player. It is an entire community. And perhaps that is the strongest evidence of all. Before Alex Eala, the highest achievements in Philippine women's tennis belonged to a very different era. Today, the country's expectations have changed completely. Young Filipino players can now point to someone who has already broken through barriers that once appeared unreachable. That is why comparisons with pioneers from other nations continue to surface. Every country eventually reaches a moment when one athlete changes what future generations believe is possible. Whether Alex Eala ultimately reaches that level will be decided over the coming years. But one thing is already clear. The conversation has shifted from whether a Filipina can compete with the world's best to how far the first one can go. And that may prove to be the most important victory of all. History remembers the athletes who didn't simply rise through the rankings, it remembers the ones who changed what people believed was possible for their country. That is the conversation Alex Eala has entered. Not because of hype, because of results. The comparisons being made today are with pioneers from nations that were never considered traditional tennis powers, players who didn't just build remarkable careers for themselves, but permanently raised the expectations for everyone who followed. That is the company Eala now keeps, not through ambition alone, but through what she has already accomplished. It is also why respected voices from outside the Philippines are describing her differently. Mary Jo Fernandez, ESPN analyst, former world-class player, two-time Olympic doubles gold medalist, and former U.S. Fed Cup captain, has watched the women's game evolve for decades. Speaking about Eala's growing impact, she described it simply: it's next level. She brings a whole new demographic and crowd to watch our sport. That observation carries weight because it comes from someone with no reason to exaggerate one player's influence. It is recognition that Eala has attracted audiences tennis was not previously reaching. The same theme emerged from veteran Filipino sports journalist and former tennis player Diane Castillo during the BBC's Sports World coverage. She described the reaction across the Philippines and among overseas Filipinos as Eala competed at Wimbledon. As the match unfolded, social media filled with messages of pride. Phones buzzed nonstop. Families watched together despite the time difference. Filipinos around the world felt connected to the same moment. That may be Eala's greatest achievement so far. She has not simply built a fan base. She has united one. Behind the scenes, however, the focus remains remarkably ordinary. Since joining forces in 2023, her coach, Spanish veteran Joan Bosch, has emphasized that the priority is never the headlines. The daily objective is staying focused on tennis, setting achievable goals, and blocking out the growing noise surrounding her career. Those closest to Eala understand that managing expectations is becoming just as important as winning matches. Even Venus Williams, after partnering with Eala in doubles before Wimbledon, summed her up with a brief but meaningful assessment. Very competitive. Coming from one of the greatest champions the sport has ever seen, those two words carry significant weight. Now step back and look at the larger picture. The Philippines is home to well over 100 million people, yet for decades it produced very little presence in elite women's professional tennis. That is changing. When Eala plays, Filipino communities across London, Melbourne, Toronto, Berlin, Los Angeles, Dubai, and countless other cities suddenly become visible inside tennis stadiums. Flags appear in the stands. Tagalog chants echo through arenas. Practice courts attract crowds that would once have gathered only for established Grand Slam champions. Those supporters were always there. What they lacked was someone to rally behind. That is what a cultural symbol does. A cultural symbol does not simply represent a nation. It allows that nation to recognize itself in places where it had rarely been seen before. Then came the reminder that every sporting journey includes setbacks. After her unforgettable center court victory, Eala returned for the round of 16. She fought back to level the match after dropping the opening set, creating the moment that sent thousands of fans inside the Phil Sports Arena into celebration. But the deciding set slipped away. Her Wimbledon run ended there. And, strangely, that defeat may have revealed as much about her future as the victory that came before it. She accepted the result without excuses. No complaints about pressure. No blame directed at the schedule. No attempt to rewrite what had happened. Instead, she spoke about the positives she would carry forward and the lessons she had gained from the tournament. That response reflected a level of maturity impossible to measure with statistics. Only months earlier, she had openly admitted that the growing crowds and attention sometimes felt overwhelming. By the end of Wimbledon, she appeared more comfortable carrying those expectations. That is growth. Not the kind recorded on a rankings list. The kind visible in the way an athlete responds when the winning stops. So, where does all of this leave us? It leaves us with a young player who defeated one of the sport's biggest names on center court before falling with grace in the next round. It leaves us with thousands of Filipinos filling an arena after midnight, not just to celebrate victory, but to celebrate possibility. It leaves us with a new standard for Philippine tennis, one that future generations will measure themselves against rather than dream about reaching. Most importantly, it leaves us with Alex Eala's own words after one of the biggest moments of her career. I went to train every day after school with my ruffled socks, light-up shoes, and chubby cheeks. To younger me, this is everything. This goes out to my family and to all the girls with ruffled socks and chubby cheeks. It means the world. Years earlier, she had stood on a graduation stage as a promising student. Today, she walks onto the world's biggest courts as one of tennis's fastest rising stars. The Phil Sports Arena will be waiting the next time she plays. So will millions of Filipinos around the world. And if her journey so far has shown us anything, it is that this story is only beginning.